Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 83 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
Colin, by the old ways, I invite you into my world. Every hearth I sit at, let you be warmed also. Every doorway I go through, let you be welcome, because today is all about entry points.
What the hell was that cold open?
Thought it was good.
I will just remind our listeners that I never know what's going to come out of this guy's mouth when we start. He does not share them in advance. Sometimes I think he thinks of them in the moment. Uh, but that was our cold open. But yeah, today we're talking about.
Sometimes I laugh so much about what I'm going to say, Colin gets very hyped up, and it's then not funny at all.
Almost like me hyping up the intermission. Um, Today, we are talking about the discourse surrounding Where to Enter the Trails series. Well, we're a little bit late because the kerfuffle happened like last week, but that's how our release schedule goes. Um, Here's what happened. About a week ago, NIS America released a trailer for Trails into Daybreak, Kuro no Kiseki, that's his localized name, and stated in its tweet that Trails into Daybreak was, quote, the perfect place to jump into the Legend of Heroes. I'm going to preface this by saying that NIS America is obliged to say this. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but the fact is they need to market the game, and you cannot market a game only to people who have played the previous 11 games or however many it is at that point. Yeah, I think that's the 11th entry into the series, not counting Naruto, so 12th. And so NIS America must say this. They've also said it for Cold Steel 3, which I would say is completely bullshit. But what happened after this is, and this happens every time NIS America releases a trailer like this, is that we have some people who start saying that's not true. The only starting point is Trails in the Sky FC because that's the starting point of the series and everything builds upon that. And then you have other people who say no, you can start with these other routes. I think everybody agrees that starting with FC is the optimal way, but you can start with Cold Steel, you can start with Daybreak, so long as once you're hooked, then you go back and you see what had happened before. This discourse gets a little bit toxic. I mean, I've seen some people who I otherwise respect, like Tark's Gauntlet in particular, but I also saw the Kiseki not getting a little bit aggressive with this kind of stuff, telling people who were more purists to, quote, shut up, trying to silence the discourse because they want things to be more approachable and more accessible. And so, Kevin, I thought that we could have a discussion about what it is to be a good starting point or a perfect starting point. But then also, I want to talk about the discourse, talk about what our responsibility is as fans of this series. Should we be trying to find starting points in the beginning? Should we be demanding more from people who are interested, or should we try to be as open and welcoming as possible?
I have a feeling we're going to have some diametrically opposed viewpoints on these very hot button issues.
I think so. Um, I have a feeling that some of my opinions are a bit more, let's call them conservative isn't the right word, but a bit more demanding and closed off than I think the people will want me to have. So I am prepared for getting some flack, but that's okay. Kevin, you started with Trails. I You wanted to start off with Trails of Cold Steel, and you played that game, and then I kind of forced you to play it through the entire series after that. So why don't you tell me a bit because I remember when you were talking to me, I told you to play FC and you didn't. And so you played Cold Steel. So I want to know why you decided to play Cold Steel first and tell us a little bit about your experience playing that without playing the other games.
Exactly. So this was in 2021, August of 2021, when I made the decision to enter the Kiseki verse. So I was in Target because one of my parents' dogs dislikes me so much he refused to eat if I was in the house. I got kicked out a bit so he could eat in peace. I went to Target,
What the fuck?
honest to God, and I was walking by, and I assumed this was near the release before or just after the release of a Kaseki game because I saw a small display case of Cold Steel games.
That must
August
have been well,
2021.
that must have been around Cold Steel 4 releasing.
I remember something vague that you had mentioned about this game series that you had played the year previous
Yeah.
and you liked it during the height of COVID. So I snapped a picture, sent it to you. I'm like, do you have you played these games? I think you have. Do you like it? You're like, they're great games. Start with the first one. The graphics suck. Start with it. Don't start with the Cold Steel. So I bought both Cold Steel and FC. I played like an hour of FC, then I played through Cold Steel 1. And why did I do that? A couple of reasons. One, and I think this answer will be pretty in line with what the others say. It felt like a more modern RPG. Not just the graphics, but the social system, the school setting. It felt like this is familiar to me. It's different, yes, but there's a lot of familiar elements. FC did not feel as familiar, and having played FC, it's unfamiliar in the best way.
Mhm.
And the second, and Colin, you're not allowed to judge me. And listeners, you're not allowed to judge me either. I saw, oh, there's a lot more fanfic for Cold Steel than the Sky. That's a contributing factor.
Because sometimes you read fan fiction of games you never even played
Oh,
before.
yeah, definitely.
Did you ever read any Cold Steel fanfic before you played Cold Steel?
No. I thought one of the times I did, because I went through Cold Steel in a couple weeks only. I finished it the night of a really bad date. I was eating cinnamon toast crunch. But I can see why I started with Cold Steel. I think you should start with FC. I can see why people would with Cold Steel 1. I want to know, has anyone started or they know of anyone who began with the crossbow games? Like I am fascinated what your impression would be or why you picked those games.
There are probably some people who started with Zero because when Zero came out last year, it got a lot of hype from JRPG YouTube. So like people like the Kaseki Nut Tark's Gauntlet, also people like Super Derek, um, the Gaming Shelf, some of these smaller YouTubers that kind of make up the JRPG space. All of them are praising the game to high heaven because it's a fantastic game, and they're all fans of the Trail series. And so then people, they have their interest peaked. And so they start asking, is this a good starting point? And this is, last year we had the same discussion because of that, where some people said, like, well, it's the beginning of an arc. So, you can start here. Other people are saying, like, no, you really should start at the beginning. I think in Zero, so many plot points are dependent upon things developed in the previous arc that it really doesn't work. Frankly, I think the same thing of Kuro. But we can talk about, well, we can't talk much about that because you haven't played it. But I can talk a little bit about that.
Do you
But
mean Zero or Azure?
I mean, I think Zero is dependent upon the Sky games. Azure isn't. I'm saying that Kuro is dependent upon previous arcs for a lot of its late game plot points. Um, Ironically, some of the same. Oh, like you should definitely at least play the third before you play Kuro, but the third pops up in a lot of different games. Um, Before we talk about why you think you should start with FC, tell me a bit more about because like you played Trails of Cold Steel, you immediately started playing Cold Steel 2. Like you liked Cold Steel. And then you eventually dropped Cold Steel 2, and then we picked up again at FC. So tell me a bit about what you liked about Cold Steel and how you felt playing it as a newcomer.
I enjoyed Cold Steel very much. I dropped Cold Steel 2 because there was a lot of increased demands of my time when I was on the academic job market, finishing up an article for peer review and so forth. It was not the game itself that made me like, this is a bad game. I'm not going to continue on. It was, oh, I need to do a lot more if I want a job in academia, which uh did not work out.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely see how it doesn't sometimes doesn't matter how much work you put in, as I found out this year.
Going through Cold Steel 1, I liked the world. I liked the graphics. I liked the combat. the quests. I like this the getting to know the characters outside just the missions. The Hiram I didn't like, but I wasn't sure why beyond just I don't like this, but having played more of the Kiseki games, it's the I can see what happens when Falcom makes a relationship an integral feature that you can't choose away from, and we don't need to spend any more time on that. We've talked this to death. So that was the nascent seeds of why I liked the centralizing the plot of the empire, the nobles, the centralizing government. I liked all of it. It felt like a lot of RPGs I either knew of or were familiar with. But, and while playing through, let me tell you something, Colin. I didn't feel like there was a lot I was missing.
Mhm.
I know now there would be, there was, will be, but it was the I don't know that I'm not seeing a lot of stuff I'm not getting.
Right.
I feel like when we go through it again, it would be there's so much added depth. There's one thing. There was a character who I hated. I texted you about him. Do you
Mhm.
remember that one?
I do.
Olivier.
You hated Olivier.
I sent you an image. I'm like, wow, this guy's a creep. He's a loser. And you just said that you think so is a serious flaw because you haven't played the other games.
And I think that this is kind of the biggest departure um in terms of trying to figure out like where you should start. Because to me, that whole scene of Olivier's introduction in Cold Steel, and we'll talk about that when we play Cold Steel. But that's a pretty important part of the game because it's revealing to you that Olivier is behind Class 7, and the game is designed for you to have played the previous 5 entries. And then when Olivier pops up onto the screen, you know who that is, and you remember some conversations that happened in Trails the Third, maybe some things that have been mentioned in Zero and Azure, and we're seeing, oh, this is the culmination of that. Whereas with you, you just saw a random dude named Olivert that seemed like somebody who's horny on main all the time. And it completely changes how you approach that scene in a way that I don't think Falcom ever intended.
I will say, though, that you get so much added, like you say, but what they do have, what you are presented with, I don't think is a failure if that's your first introduction to the character. You get a pretty good idea of who and what he is. Not as complete, but a good starting point. But when again, it should not be a starting point, but as one, I do think it works.
I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding. It got you interested enough in the series to actually go back and play at the other games. I think that the uh, ability to claim that Trails of Cold Steel is a quote unquote good starting point is uncontested because it was a good starting point for you. You are proof of that. Um, to me, this is different than telling somebody if you want to get into the series, you can go ahead and start with Cold Steel. To me, if we're going to be giving like a recommendation on where to start, the answer should always be FC because this is a long running, continuous narrative with constant callbacks in every game to previous games, and that is designed to be consumed in a linear order. Um, the example that comes to my mind from my own life is that I grew up. You and I are part of the Harry Potter generation, right? We played Harry Potter a lot. Not we didn't play Harry Potter a lot, although I played some of the video games. But um, we read all of the books. We kind of grew up with those books. And my first Harry Potter novel was The Prisoner of Azkaban, book 3. And I read it and I liked it. I liked it enough that I went back and I read uh, Sorcerer's Stone, Chamber of Secrets, and then went on to Goblet of Fire. And then from there, bought the books the midnight that they came out. Um, but I would never call Prisoner of Azkaban a good starting point. Just because I could start with it, it's not designed to be a good starting point. It's designed to be the third book in a 7 book series. or even no, it's 7 books. Um, so I'm not sure why we would ever suggest somebody play Cold Steel, the sixth game in a at this point 12 or 13 entry series.
I Let me offer partial devil's advocate, partial, maybe not my opinion, what other people think, and I sympathize, even if now I don't entirely agree. How long does it take to read Harry Potter books one and two?
It depends on how much time, but a couple of days depending on your age and reading level.
It's measured in single hours, low double digits.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, totally.
the time investment for FC, SC the third, Zero Azure is a lot more.
Mhm.
The monetary investment is it's less now with how cheap and often they're on sale, but still there's something. So I can see, and for a long time you could not play Zero and Azure in English. And I don't know how long it was until Geofront did their translation. Before them, not at all. So there's more barriers of different kinds. So that's why I think.
The translation point is a good one. I will say there were translations before Geofront. In fact, the Azure version I played was not Geofront. Geofront came out with its translation after I had finished playing that game. But certainly, like if a game is not available in your language, then you should not be expected to play with it, which is frustrating when Cold Steel 3 comes out and has callbacks to the Crossbell games that had not been released in English. And yet, NIS America is claiming that CS3 is a perfect starting point to get into the series. That doesn't make any goddamn sense to me. But let me respond to you in this point. I agree that telling somebody to start in the beginning of this series because they want to get into the later games is, it is a lot of time investment. These are all,
Colin,
what
how much free time do you have
do I have? Well, right now, a
in a
lot.
day? Well, a month ago, how much free time did you have in a day?
I mean, I guess one could say that if you're being responsible, you have maybe about like 3 hours of gaming max in the evening after you're done making dinner and all of that stuff.
How many days, weeks? So you see Kuro 2 or Cold Steel 1, like that looks good. I want to buy it. First, I got to spend weeks, months before I can get to that. That's an even longer if I play other games or do something else with my time in that night. So there's that.
No, I mean, I understand that that is a barrier to entry, but let me counterpoint with something. Trails is unique. Like you and I were trying to think of other long-running narrative series, right? Because something that makes Trails special is that this is a sequential, linear narrative in a persistent world in which things that happen in FC are still relevant to our understanding of things happening in Kuro 2. And that's not the same for things like the Yakuza games, which is probably the closest parallel that we thought of. Because while, yes, there are continual threads, those plots, at least so far as I can tell, and I've played a good 4 or 5 of them, are relatively self-contained. Um, Kingdom Hearts might be a better comparison, in which each game does lead into the next, even when it's prequels, like sequel lead into a prequel and it's a mess. Kingdom Hearts is also not the best example of a understandable narrative. But I would also say that if you're going to get into the Kingdom Hearts series, that you should not start with Kingdom Hearts 3, that you should play Kingdom Hearts 1 and then Chain of Memories and Kingdom Hearts 2. That's how I played these games when I decided I wanted to get into the series. I would say that is part of the design of what makes this series special is that in order to get the best experience, you start from the beginning, and that by doing that, you are rewarded. This is why I started in the beginning. When COVID hit and I was looking for something to invest my time into, what attracted me about this game series is that it was unique in that way, that it was like no other. And so I decided, because I was interested in this series, that I would then start at the beginning, like everybody is telling me to do. I don't think that we should turn around and say, oh, but if you're interested in better graphics, well, then you can start there. I mean, this is if we're going to be
Why not?
treating games as art, Kevin, why can't we treat them as art and actually expect some investment from people who want to get into it?
So I agree that the best starting point, the optimal one, is FC. But I think, I mean, not just you physically, you have the ability to push the buttons to start with Cold Steel. I do think you can get a good experience of the games of the Cold Steel quadrology, starting with Cold Steel 1, with Rain as your introduction to that series. Is it the best? No, but I think it can be pretty quite good.
Let me counter
And I
because you
think
said let me just step in here. You said that you can have a good experience with the Cold Steel quadrality, or however the four games if you start with Cold Steel 1. And I agree that Cold Steel 1 you can. Cold Steel 2 you definitely cannot. There are things that happen in Cold Steel 2 that if you have not played Crossbell, you don't know what the fuck's happening. Similarly, Cold Steel 3 and 4, if you haven't played the previous games, you are lost. You are just completely lost.
I'm looking forward to going through Cold Steel 1 to see what I didn't realize, and going through the 2, 3, and 4, and then looking at that myself. But here's something that I wrote down in our Google Doc notes.
Mhm.
I mean, we want people, and you, me personally, Falcom, they want people to play the games. And on the one hand, there's all these maybe barrier, or maybe, I'm not sure what the right word that we've spent a number of minutes talking about is. It seems like it would be very tough to have continual growth if there's a hundreds of hours lead in to the
Mhm.
latest game. Think about it from a business perspective. Not everyone who buys FC bought SC, the third, and so forth. So how do
Absolutely.
you deal? Falcon does not want 5% of the people who bought FC to buy Kuro 2. They want 150%. I mean, or as much as possible. So how how can they balance? How can players, fans balance this very complex of this thing?
So I agree with you that Falcom needs to worry about that. I agree with you that NIS America has to worry about that. It's why NIS America is marketing Trails into Daybreak as the perfect starting point. It's
Which is
flashy.
funny, which is so funny.
It's the brand new entry. It is the start of an arc, so like you can get into there and really dig in without being completely lost. That's why they're doing it. But
Yes.
my counterpoint to you is you say, well, we want more people to get into it. And I do want people who are interested to get into it, but I'm not Falcom. I don't necessarily care if
No.
they're maximizing sales. And this is something that I kind of wanted to ask as well is like, how much should a fan group or a fandom care about expanding the fandom to new people? And what kept coming back to my mind is the time when I was dating an evangelical and I would have to attend Bible study with her. I'm a Catholic. I'm not the best Catholic. This woman was very, very religious. And we would sit there and she would say, well, we all here, we just want everybody to accept Christ. We want to spread this to everybody. She would pray for other people to convert. And I was looking at her like she had two heads. And I said, I don't care if other people convert to this religion or not. I care about their health. I care about their well being. I don't care if they convert to Christianity. That's on them. If they want to, they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. That's not my call. And she looked at me like I had two heads because to her, if you're, if you truly believe that Christianity has value, then you want other people to join it. Obviously, Christianity is not the same thing as the Trails fandom, although some fans treat fandoms like religion itself. But what I'm saying is that in my position as a fan of the Falcom series, the only reason why I wanted more people to play it was because I wanted to talk about it with other people. Well, I got you. That was enough. 1-to-1. If people want to play the games and then they decide to take the plunge, more than happy to talk to them, more than happy, to check and see how they're doing, more than happy for them to choose to join the fandom. But I am not in the position of thinking that we need to lower standards in order to get people in.
Not lower standards. So yeah, in general, one it's always, people that if you like something, you're like, oh, I want others to like it too. And have another point of talking to them about something I like and now they like. So there's that. Strangers, I agree with you there. We don't care about, I mean, it's not our purview for Falcom, the corporation. That should be a big worry for them, not for us. We want as good a gaming experience as possible. And so, on the one hand, you're balanced between Skilla and Charybdis. Falcom needs to make money, they have this dilemma. But on the other hand, the best gaming experience possible with the Kiseki series specifically is the narrative, is the long
Mhm.
intertwined connection, which means going through starting with FC. To me, that is the best. I mean, yeah, yes, graphics, yes, mechanics, but the story and the characters, it works best when we have this long arc going all the way back from that farm outside um Roland or wherever it was.
Yes, Roland. Um, I think that people could listen to the rant that I just had um, about lowering standards and point out, Colin, your good friend Kevin literally started by playing Trails of Cold Steel. Aren't you glad that he did? Because now he's into the series and you can have this podcast where you're going through uh, the entire series together. That wouldn't have happened if you kept insisting that he only play FC. And I have,
Colin, these voices in your head, are they always so reasonable?
yes, they are incredibly reasonable all of the time. Uh, my counterpoint to the voices that I've made up, but are based off of some of the discourse that I've seen on the internet, is that on the one hand, sure, I am glad that Kevin played Cold Steel so that he could get into the series. Um, I'm also made him start a podcast with me to go through the games in order because I knew that he would not like the Cold Steel games if he kept continuing. So that, and we had a bet about me watching Attack on Titan, which I promised him I would do once he played through all of the Trails games, which he thought was only the first Trails game, which wasn't the case. And then I set up a podcast so that I wouldn't have to watch Attack on Titan for years until I ended up just watching Attack on Titan. It's pretty great. Y'all should watch it. So Kevin won that one. Kevin won that one.
Yes,
But
yes.
like I knew that starting from the beginning was better. And so I've gone out of my way to walk with my friend as he plays through this series together. That's the foundation of this show. And Kevin will even now say that starting with FC was the right way to do it because these are how these games are designed. But I think that this brings up another concept that I keep seeing people use on the internet in a way that I think is over, it basically is misused. And that's the term gatekeeping, which is also linked to accessibility. But by accessibility, we mean the ability to physically play the game, as in like own the software, not necessarily disability or difficulty levels. Many people will claim that the position that I have, which is we should just be telling people to go play FC and not telling them that it's okay to play Cold Steel or Kuro, even while acknowledging that some people might find them more appealing. But ideally, I would always say play FC. People might say that that is gatekeeping because I'm telling somebody that if you are not starting with FC, then you're not getting the real experience. Perhaps I might say you're not a real Kiseki fan. And then that's closing us off from people who are interested. And I would say that is not gatekeeping. What is gatekeeping? Gatekeeping is when you have a system in which you have people at the top who are physically preventing people from entering on the basis of some standards. For example, let's say you want to be a classicist in academia. If you do not know Latin and Greek, used to be,
Don't.
yeah, no, exactly. If you don't know Latin and Greek and you want to be a classicist, you cannot be a classicist. And there have been debates in our own field about that. People are saying that maybe you shouldn't need the languages. Maybe you should be able to just rely on translations so long as you care about the ancient world and stuff like that. It's why there's classical civilization majors and minors, and it's starting to impact graduate admissions as well. Their gatekeeping is falling down. But what I'm pointing out is that when it comes to entering the field of classics, for the longest time, you did not know Latin and Greek, you were not admitted. That was actual gatekeeping. That was people refusing you entry into a graduate program or even sometimes into an undergraduate major if you did not have the requisite skills. That's gatekeeping. We live in a free world. Most of us do anyway. I'm not sure if we have any listeners from places like China or Russia or whatever, but for those of us who live in the West, we live in a free world. The only thing stopping you from playing any of these games is your own mind. If Kevin wanted to, he could go and download Trails of Cold Steel 4 right now, put it on a Steam Deck, and go play it. I can't stop him. You can't stop him. He can do that if he wants to. You can start with Azure if you want to. You can do anything you want, no matter what somebody on the internet says. So can we please stop acting as if because some people like me have the opinion that you should start with FC? That means we're gatekeeping the community because we're doing nothing of the sort.
I want to interject. I agree with you on a number of points here. Gatekeeping Colin is like panic. By definition, it's never good. Like by what panic means, you should never panic because it's always inopportune at the wrong time. Panic versus alarm or worry. And gatekeeping is similar. But the intrinsic root, the meaning is never good. And I think you talked around, and I think something, and I want to put it in a bit simpler terms about being able to play the game. No one's stopping. You can play the games, engage in however way you want. But there's a difference between that and being praised for starting later or not being judged is often a negative connotation, but maybe judged is the right word, not being judged for starting later, if that makes sense. It's about people have thoughts and opinions about anything in fandom. Oftentimes, people are stupid. The thoughts and opinions are stupid because we're lizard brains, monkey brains, barely evolved past that. And if you people are going to have thoughts about starting at different points, and they should not be they can be critical. I don't think they should be negative. As in, I don't think you should play because of A, B, and C versus lol, you suck, or whatever.
Oh yeah, no,
Got a
I
bit
agree with
rambly.
you on this. Like if somebody posts on Twitter or something, starting my journey with Trails into Daybreak, nobody should say, "Hey, you fucking idiot, what are you doing? That's the 11th game of the series." Maybe if
It's a
they ask
wrong
for it,
move.
says what?
I think it's the wrong move.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the wrong move. Now I'm not somebody who just like tweets at random people that I don't know. But if there's a conversation, I would agree with the side that says you actually should not start there. You should start in FC. We're talking here about the ability to have opinions and express them in a measured way on the internet, not telling people to go off and yell or troll or flame people, if flame is even a word
Colin,
that we use.
do you know what toxic positivity means? Have you ever encountered it?
Oh, I've encountered it a bunch. Everything is good vibes all the time. You can always tell too when somebody is using that as a means to get through a terrible time in their own life. But why don't you tell me a bit more about where you're coming from?
I think, toxic positivity, it's often used as a way to elide or just ignore often real differences in opinion or thoughts on conduct or standards or what say you. It's a personal introspection is often good. Evaluating of others within reasonable, acceptable boundaries is often good. Like Colin telling me you should start with FC and saying why and so forth, as opposed to him saying, "Yeah, it's awesome. You're so great for starting with Cold Steel 1." And I know I may not be making a lot of sense, getting a bit rambly. I never ever do, obviously. But yeah, I mean that person, if they posted on Twitter, I'm gonna start with Kuro 2, which is no Daybreak 1. Kuro 1 is Daybreak 1.
Yeah.
Kiseki is a great series. Have you considered going with what the developers intend to be your starting point of FC because of A, B, and C. I think that's good. I think that that's awesome. You should start with whatever you want. Don't listen to others. That gets into toxic positivity.
I think so. And I think this is something I don't fight with people on Twitter. Recently, I had a discussion with a listener, which was thought provoking, and in many ways is why we're having this conversation. In that I posted my frustrations about content creators, telling other people to shut up about this issue. Something that another listener had posted, not the one that I got into this semi-heated discussion with, pointed out that probably a lot of creators, because they love the Kiseki series and they want people to get into it, feel that they need to push the discourse to be as welcoming as possible. And so pushing the talking point that yes, Daybreak is a great starting point is not so much a statement of fact, but rather a statement of, well, it's good enough and it might get people interested. Therefore, we should encourage people to start there.
And we should be welcoming. Let's be very clear on that. Welcoming, open, friendly, because that's how, in general, we should behave towards others. I think a lot of this can get heated online because it's so easy to be like, the way you can talk to someone online, you would never ever talk to someone face to face or on a Zoom or team call or whatever. Just so assuming the worst, going straight for the jugular and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, I at least I hope you don't talk to people in the real world
I
that way.
hope so too. Yes, yes.
There are some people who do, who deserve to get punched. Something that this listener who I got into a discussion had brought up was the issue of accessibility. And by that, they meant, some people might be limited in their hardware. If you have a Switch, for instance, and that's the only thing that you can play on, then the only games you have access to are Zero, Azure, Nayuta, Cold Steel 4, Cold Steel 3, and Reverie, and then Kuro. Cold Steel 1 and 2 are not on the Switch in English, and none of the Sky games are on the Switch. They're also not in English on any of the PlayStation consoles except the PSP. And I poo-pooed this idea, and I've kind of been revising my thoughts on it a little bit. But I responded to this listener by saying, yeah, but who owns a Switch and doesn't own a computer? Uh, the Sky games can run on a fucking potato, just so long as they're able to click the buy button and download it, then they should be fine. And I do think that for the vast majority of people, on account of Windows takes up like 90% of the computer market share in the world, and the Steam Deck is also a very popular thing, so anybody running Linux can run the Sky games decently well as well. But I checked something today in preparation for this discussion that has changed my mind a little bit, which is that the Sky games are not available on Mac. They're just not. And
Oh,
a lot of
wow.
people do use Macs. I have Mac
Yeah.
OS X on my laptop. I have a gaming PC at home. I didn't have one for a while after I killed it, but I recently got a new one in. A little financially irresponsible, but I'm glad I have it. That one now runs Windows and Linux. But it does mean that if I wanted to play the Sky games on this laptop, what I would have to do is emulate the PSP. And then that would give me FC and SC in a much inferior format, and with a pretty inferior translation. Um, I don't think that there even is a PSP version in English of Trails the Sky the Third. You could also try emulating it, the Vita versions with fan translations. That I will say, I don't think it's a good argument to say, well, this is difficult, emulation is difficult, therefore it's keeping people out. I do think that if you want to play the game, then there is a way for you to play it. But I will say that being on Mac is literally the worst experience you could have. And if you only have a Switch or a Mac, there is a good argument to be made of they are not going to be able to have the experience that Falcom wants them to have. And then, I mean, what are you going to do? Tell them to go buy a new PC or tell them to go buy a Steam Deck just so they can play a retro game? On that point, I kind of get it. But at the same time, um,
Always going
you
to be
should
edge
start there.
cases and sympathetic and so-called sympathetic the term in policy circles is sympathetic loser. That can be a bit mean, but it's a term used. There's always going to be people who, even if 90% benefit from a policy or law or initiative, always going to be those who, for reasons not their own fault, not their own culpability, see a material worsening as a side effect. Unintentional, but it does happen. And the vast majority of people have the ability, and we know this from what kind of market share for games and sales points and what say you, where playing FC, SC the third, crossbelt, and so on is well within their parameters and their capabilities. Like for those who can't, it sucks. And how often have we talked about how weird Falcom is with how they release games and what platforms? It's super strange.
Well,
But for
here,
the vast majority,
so for the Sky Games and some other stuff in particular, I don't think the fault here is even Falcom. So it would be very easy for us to say all Falcom has to do to fix this issue is release the Sky Games in English on like the PlayStation 4, on the Xbox, and Switch. The problem is that these games were translated locally by Xseed. Xseed does
yes.
not have Xseed had all of the rights for the Sky Games and for Cold Steel 1 and 2. In Cold Steel 3 is when it switched to NIS America. That means that Xseed owns all of the rights to these translations, but they don't own the rights to
Yeah.
publishing Trails games anymore. So what is Falcom going to do? You literally cannot tell NIS unless NIS America agrees to retranslate all of the Sky games, which we're still behind on the Trail series. I think that would be a terrible decision on their part, and the fandom would erupt. So they can't, go ahead and retranslate the Sky games. Xseed, I think legally Xseed wouldn't be able to do it because then they would be in conflict with NIS America's ability to publish Trails games. I think that's how it works. I don't know for sure, but it part of this is even not even a fault of the developer, but it's about localization rights in the West. The Sky games do have PS3 versions. They might not have PS4 versions, but they are playable on the PS4 and PS5 through their different cloud services that Sony has.
Yeah.
But they will never be approachable that way on that platform in America because they can't put the English translations in there. And that's a really, it's one of the weak spots of this fandom is that if you want to play the Sky games, you must have a Windows or a Linux computer. If you don't, or a PSP that somehow has access to those games, probably by hacking, or a Vita.
A question. Do we say console exclusives are unaccessible?
Some people have made the argument that console exclusives are inaccessible. Mostly they're terming it in forms of anti-consumer. Let's say you have a PlayStation and a game, God forbid, comes out on Xbox that you really want to play. Hard to believe nowadays, I know, but it happens. Then you might say, geez, I guess I have to go buy an Xbox.
It
Though,
sucks.
I mean, it sucks, I guess. To me, like, I grew up in the time in which PlayStation 1 and Nintendo had completely different games. And also, you only got one console. My parents were going to buy me another console. I mean,
No,
eventually I got
no.
PS2, but it took me a long time. So I was tied to the GameCube. And you know what?
Yes.
That's just how gaming was. And I think that there's a lot to be said about the importance of exclusives for console identity and for the possibility of the console exclusives to make full use of the hardware, both in optimization and in extra features. So you don't own a PlayStation 5, right?
No. I have an Xbox, the newest kind.
You have an Xbox Series.
Yes.
So the Xbox Series X, that controller, it doesn't have force feedback in the triggers. The PlayStation 5 does. So, like, let's say that you're playing Spider-Man and you're swinging along New York City, you will feel resistance in the triggers that you can also then like push down on to get extra speed.
Oh well.
Similarly, if you're playing Ratchet and Clank and there's a gun that is like an automatic firing gun, you'll feel the trigger push back against your thumb in a rapid way as the bullets are going. These are super cool things. Doesn't always work in every game, but like it's cool that the controller can do that. And when you launch your PS5, there's a game, Astrobot. Um, I forget exactly what it's called, the showroom, I think, which it's a fun little 3D platformer that showcases all of the uses of the controller. That said, I've played like 4 or 5 games that actually use those features on the controller, all of which have to be PlayStation exclusives, or at least initially so, because Xbox doesn't have those features. Windows doesn't have those features, or at least you can't expect that people will always be playing with a DualSense controller on Windows. So, because you're aiming for a multi-platform target, it doesn't make sense to develop features using this very exclusive feature on the PlayStation. But then that turns into a loop of a lot of the features that PlayStation 5 has, we never actually get to use. A new Astrobot game is coming out very soon. That I am looking forward to playing that precisely for that reason. So I mean, I do think that there are some positives to exclusivity.
Yeah, and we talk about it differently than say getting into the Trails series. It's a known I feel like it's a known fact of life that you have to accept. Whereas for this, getting into the Kiseki series, it's not as societally or fandomly set. There's more room for negotiation. And yeah, negotiation is good. Start with FC.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting this from the premise that people have successfully started with Cold Steel. Kevin is one of them. Like there are definitely places that are better than others to start it, but
Yeah,
F it's not just the fact that FC is the optimal starting place. I feel like optimal means um, this is the best way, but you can also do others. While technically true, uh, approaching the series, I think that as fans we have to say no, in terms of getting the actual way that the series is intended to be consumed, the only way to start is to play FC. And that's a
get
strong
books,
statement. Said what?
TV shows, long running TV shows, long running novel series. You start with the Wheel of Time with book one. You start with Buffy the Vampire Slayer season one, episode one, or Vampire Diaries, or let's think of a show that won't make me sound weird. Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones.
You start in the beginning, and for some people, and it's understandable. I'm not judging. You're not judging. It's too much of an investment. They go to what fits their needs and their capabilities at that time, and they should. They can start with season four, episode two. You won't get a good intended experience out of it.
I mean, it's kind of like when, for example, House of the Dragon season two is coming out soon. And I'm sure that people are going to get hyped up about it. I'm looking forward to it because I really liked season one. But it would be like if somebody said, "Can I start House of the Dragon season two?" When all of the events that created the events happening in season two are told and you are expected to know what's happening in season one.
Oh, do you need to watch Game of Thrones though? No, you don't. It's intended to be a starting point into the Westeros universe, season one, episode one of House of the Dragon. You can start there.
Sure.
Can't
And
start season two.
but I think the beauty of Kiseki is that it doesn't have those kinds of separate universes. So, like in Yakuza, there's a subset of these games called Judgment and Lost Judgment, that are set in the same world as the Yakuza games, but are not narratively linked to them, as far as I know, because I haven't actually played them yet. But so they share some of the same locations and stuff like that. You could walk into Judgment just fine, not having played any of the Yakuza games, and vice versa. But with Kiseki, all of the games are linked to each other, except Nayuta, kind of. We don't know yet. But like Sky, Zero, Cold Steel, Daybreak, it's not just that they're all set in the same universe, is that they're narratively tied to each other. It would be like, I think more what's going on with like when Daybreak comes out and people want to play it. It'll be like if it's all the hype about the last book of Harry Potter. Or maybe say like book six comes out because we're not at the conclusion yet. But like people know what Harry Potter is, it's in the zeitgeist. Maybe you haven't read the books yet. Your friend is going to a midnight release and hey, can I tag along? Maybe I'll start with book six because you're buying it too, and it looks really cool. And I would say, or like even better, this is the only book that the bookstore has. They don't have the rest of the series. They ran out or something. And I think that if you're a kid with limited resources, like we all were at one point, that can be a decent argument to make. You know, you read what's in front of you. It's how I got started reading The Prisoner of Azkaban because that was the book that was at Target. And that's what my mom bought for me, and that's what I read. As an adult, I have the ability to say, I shouldn't start here. Let me go buy this other book on Amazon and it can arrive in my house in 2 days, or even immediately if I'm reading it on the Kindle. And I'm going to start with Harry Potter book one, because I recognize that starting a narrative at the end is stupid.
Agreed. And I just want to say one thing as we wrap up this episode here. And it's about the developers have a vision for how this game, how this series is to be experienced. Are the developers above criticism? My God, no. We know my thoughts on some parts of the series, but I think to really engage respectfully in good faith, you got to engage on the terms that have been set. And for this series, it's FC through. And that's the long and short of it.
Yeah, I this, as I said before in this podcast, this game series is special. It's practically the only of its kind. The closest analog I can think of is Kingdom Hearts in terms of having this long continuous narrative. It is a game series that requires you know, investment. And I think that if, as fans, we want people to engage with it in the way that made us fall in love with it, or I should say, made me fall in love with it. I'm kind of forcing you along, but now you agree that FC is the best place to start with.
Yes.
It doesn't come from a place of malice or wanting to keep people out necessarily or anything like that. It's just that to me, you know, if we're going to treat games as art, we should be serious and intentional about that. You wouldn't tell somebody, okay, you're going to read Dante's Divine Comedy, start with Paradiso. You know, you start with Inferno. It's designed to be read Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. That's just how it is. And you know what? Those books, the classic books, take a lot of investment, both in terms of reading time, but also having some of the background you need to understand some of the references, of which you need less of that in Trails, but it's kind of built in because there's a lot of references in later games that you can only appreciate if you play the earlier ones. And that's part of what makes this series so special. Um, and it's one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of it as it is, because I put in that time and I could fall in love with it. Why wouldn't I want somebody to experience that? And you could say there's nothing wrong with somebody starting from a later entry and then working their way back. And that's true. Kevin did it. But if I'm going to tell them how to start, it's going to be FC. And I think the very fact that we have to say, okay, go play the first game in an arc, now start from the beginning, just skip the first step and start from the beginning.
Exactly.
How much hate do you think we're going to get for this?
I want this to make waves.
I mean, we're not going to make waves. We are not big enough to make waves.
I mean, that's why I would love it.
I think, well, we'll definitely get a response from Pork Bob for sure, because Pork Bob responds to every single episode. But I don't know if he'll agree with this one or not.
Discourse is good.
That discourse is bad. This discourse is good.
Exactly.
Anything else you want to say, Gav?
It's a complicated topic. Me and Colin agree on some points, disagree on others. I'm sure our listeners, you'll agree with us on some, disagree on others.
Well,
There's a
hold
lot of
on.
perspectives.
Kevin, if you say we disagree on stuff, and I know that we do, but most of this episode has been us agreeing. So what's something you disagree with me about?
Colin, this is a complicated topic on many issues, including but not limited to this topic. We agree on some, we disagree on others. Our listeners, you'll agree with us on some, disagree on others. It's a lot to take in, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of valid perspectives that we may not agree with in the entirety, but we're not saying you should not think the way you do.
Oh, that is actually something else that I wanted to get into, very briefly, but it's kind of what spurred me into doing this is seeing content creators that I respect telling people who hold opinions that I have to shut up. And I think that that is an unhealthy way to approach a discourse. We shouldn't be silencing voices because now, okay, let me just also say this. Turk's Gauntlet telling somebody else to shut up is not silencing them. One person has speech, another person has speech. It's just two acts of speech. There's no actual silencing or anything like that. I hate it when people talk about silencing people like this. But I would say that in terms of having discussions online, trying to shut down other people's opinions in search of a higher goal of being more accessible or something like that reduces the organic, I should say, reduces authentic discussion. Uh, we all have opinions. The internet is a place for us to share those opinions, and so long as we're respectful about it, we should be able to have these discussions. It's why we're talking about it on this podcast, as opposed to me just having a tweet and then never talking about it again, because it's an important issue. Um, but I think that we need to have room to actually have that discussion, as opposed to my opinion is right and everybody else is wrong, and I'm never going to talk about this again.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Next episode will be a great topic. Cannot wait to get into it. Until then, I'm
Kevin,
Kevin.
how far are you
That's
into Dragon
Colin.
Quest V?
There's a reason I didn't say what the topic would be, Colin.
No, for real, how far are you into it?
Okay, this is a judgment-free zone. So whatever I'm going to say next, you're not allowed to judge, okay?
Okay.
I am in the tower.
Which tower?
The first tower.
You mean like the castle after where you go with Bianca?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
You can't judge me.
I'm not judging you. I'm just noting that I will not be finishing this final dungeon anytime soon.
Until next time,
Until next time.
I'm Kevin. That's Colin.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye bye.